Hi, welcome to the channel. I'm Lauro Miller and I make videos about programming. Today is the last video of the strings mini-series and we're gonna talk about template literals and tagged templates. They are those strings with backticks in JavaScript which have quite a few interesting features that are not available in single quotes nor in double quotes. Let's switch Notion and let's start the discussion. Template literals and tagged templates. We are going to discuss the two of them. Ta-da, very creative here. I don't really have that much more to discuss. I just want to give you an introduction to the topic. Template literals is relatively easy to understand and to work with. The more complex version, the tag templates, they are a little bit more complicated to find use cases, but you will come across several usages of them when working with other libraries. So for example, the GraphQL tag library uses tagged templates or the styled components to create CSS components, or to use CSS in JS also uses tagged templates. It's better that we are familiar with the structure, but we don't really need to spend too much time trying to find use cases where we ourselves would implement this from scratch. Let's start with template literals. I'm going to create a new file here and I'm going to call this literals, I think that's correct, .js. And template literals are simply those strings that have backticks or that are created using backticks. So I'm going to call this template literal, and there are two characteristics that differentiate these strings from the single quotes and double quotes. The first one is that we can spawn multiple lines. So it's fine to do something like this. I am the second line actually, because then here there is a first line which is not printed. So I am the first line, right? Then I am the second line, I am the third line, and then you will see that here at the bottom there will be an empty line in the console. So if I save this, let's now switch to the console and we're gonna run node literals.js. Oops, of course, as always, I forget the console.log statement, sorry for that. Template literal, and then I save this, execute it again, and you see that there is an empty line here at the bottom, right? We print I am the first line, the second line, third line, and then an empty line. If you want to get rid of it, we can simply finish the template string right after the end of the third line. I save this, run, then no empty line. Of course, here also, not of course, but it's interesting to know that it respects the white spaces. So if we actually add a couple of white spaces here and then we save and we run this, you will see that they will be correctly printed in the console. So this is the first part, or the first differentiating factor of template literals. If I were just to give an example here, try to create a double quote string and then spawn multiple lines, right? You see that we will already start having errors here. So this is not possible. JavaScript, we would have to start marking these characters here, or giving the special characters for the new lines, and then we should add plus, and then we would concatenate with another string. But this, of course, is much cleaner to write if we simply can spawn multiple lines at once by using the template literal. The second one, and perhaps the more powerful feature, is that we can actually interpolate values. So interpolated, and this is going to be a template literal again, but let's say something like this, person, right? A person, and then I think I already gave this example 10,000 times, but it's the first one that comes to my mind, and maybe I should think about something else. But anyway, we have our person here, and then if we want to say your name is, then here we can actually interpolate the value of variables. Actually, not only variables, but expressions, right? So if we want to print the first name, then we can save this and let's execute again in console. Oops, again, console.log, interpolate it. And once I save this and execute it again, you see your name is Lauro. Now let me comment this out to avoid polluting too much, clear the whole thing, and try it once again, and your name is Lauro. Now, here we can also, as I said, have other or more complex expressions. I can check, for example, if the first name is defined, and if it is not defined, then I'm just gonna print unknown, right? I'm just gonna print unknown. And then let's say here that I'm going to change this, your last name is, and then person.last name. I'm gonna save this and I'm gonna run, and then it's gonna print your last name is unknown. Now, one gotcha here is that I think, yeah, you will quite immediately realize the mistake if you do that, but it's important to actually, instead of for example, running, let's say, something like this, one thing that we can actually use is perhaps to say, okay, I want to print something only if I have that value defined. So I could say, for example, const should print, or only if satisfies a certain Boolean value. And because of the value preservation thing in JavaScript that I discussed, and I think I'm going to put the card somewhere here on the above, or yeah, I think here on the screen, where I discussed the basic principles of operators in JavaScript, and the value preservation is one of them. So I can, for example, say if it should print, then it's going to print the person.first name, and because this is true, then it's going to check the value of the second one, and then it's going to return the value of the second one. So if I save this now and I print, it's fine, and of course not my last name, but just my name is Lauro, like so. But the problem here is that if I pass a false, then this should print here is going to be a falsy value, and because of the way that end works, then should print is going to be returned. So the false value is going to be returned, and this is going to print your name is false, right? So it's a bit weird. Of course, we don't want to print false here, but because we are interpolating with a string, then this gets converted into a string and it prints false. So actually the more correct way is to check if should print, then you print the first name, otherwise you return an empty string. And this is the ternary operator that we discuss when we talk about booleans. So if I save this and I run, then now it's correct, right? So it doesn't output anything, and that's because should print is equal to false. If I change this back to true, then it's going to print my name once again. That's it for the first half. We are done with the template literals. Hopefully the interpolation is understood, at least to a basic level. Of course, you can have more complex expressions here. You could have an array which is going to be mapped to a certain string, or each of the elements are going to be mapped to a certain string. It's also fine. So if I were to say something like this, 1, 2, 3 dot map, and then element, and I'm gonna return again another string here, and that's going to say, let's say, li if you are writing some HTML code, and then you're going to print the value of the element, right? Something like this. And if I save this and execute this in the console, then you will see that it's going to print this. It's going to map the string. It's going to create a bunch of list items. Of course, there is the comma here. This is because when we map in an array, we're going to explore arrays later down the road, but when we map, we simply transform each of the elements according to the function that is passed, right? So the value that is returned from the function is going to be the new quote-unquote element in the mapped array. And here we are converting the whole array, or the whole mapped array, to a string. And remember, when we convert arrays to strings, we actually concatenate their string representation of their values with commas, right? So you could also say something like this, and then you could also, to get rid of the commas, you could simply say join with an empty string, and then if I run, now the commas are gone and we have some HTML code here. Ta-da! Quite interesting, right? So as you can see, interpolation can be quite powerful. I just want to give you an introduction to the topic, and we will go back to this at many points in the future when we talk about more applied knowledge. So now you know that this is valid. Okay, so as I said, I think it's already marked here. Let's move to tagged templates. New file, tagged.js. The goal here is to give you a basic understanding of the topic. It's not to make you an expert on how to use tagged templates, but it's quite often the case that you will come across these constructs when working with third-party libraries. So for example, if you want to use the GraphQL tag library, you will use tagged templates. If you want to use the styled component library to create some styled elements in your React application, or in other applications for that matter, then you will also come across these tagged templates. It's better that you are familiar with the structure. Well, behind a tag template, there is normally a function. So I'm going to start by declaring a function, and this is I'm just going to call this tagged. Okay, and here I'm going to say args. And for the moment, I'll simply console.log these arguments on the screen. So let's see what happens once I actually run this tagged function with a template literal. So let's say my string, something like this. Let's save this and let's come back to the console. I'm going to clear everything and run node tagged.js. And as you can see, it actually logged an array. It didn't log a string, right? If I were to try to call this tagged here with a single quote string, this is not going to be allowed. I'm not allowed to do that. I can actually pass the string as an argument, and that's fine. And once I run this, I will simply console.log the string. But if I pass this template literals, I'm actually logging, printing an array which contains this my string here. Now, what happens if I want to take advantage of that interpolation thing we just discussed, and I want to pass some qualifier here? Let's say my qualifier, something like this, right? And then this is going to be called awesome. So my awesome string. What happens if I pass something like this? My awesome, qualifier, not awesome, my qualifier string. So my awesome string. If I save this and I run the file, you'll see that, interesting. Now I have two strings in my array and they're actually split. And as you can see here, based on the space, they are actually split right at this interpolation level. What happens if I were to pass another qualifier, or another interpolation, let's say the verb here, and I'm going to say will be, for example, and maybe I could also, something like this. And here I'm going to interpolate the verb and then I'm going to say printed, right? My awesome string will be printed. And I save this and you see, okay, interesting. So now it seems that we are starting to observe a pattern. So the tagged templates that we can use, they will actually split this incoming template literal right at the interpolation values or variables, or more generally expressions. But where do they actually go? Now let's try to access this, and this we can actually start by passing additional arguments here so that we can, let's say, arg1. So now let's switch this to arg0, arg1, and arg2. And then we're going to console.log arg0, we're going to console.log arg1, and we're going to console.log arg2. I will save this and we run again, and then you see that we are able to access both of those values that were interpolated in our original template literal. So what a tagged template does is actually it takes this template literal, it splits this into the interpolations that we pass in this string, and then as the first argument to our function, it's going to pass all the original vanilla strings or the string parts of this whole interpolation things, and then it's going to append as additional arguments to this first argument. So not to this first, but after this first argument, it's going to start adding additional arguments to this function. Now in JavaScript, there is a very handy construct because, well, as you may imagine, if I simply remove this second interpolation here and I leave my function with 3 arguments, the last one is going to be undefined, right? Because I have only one interpolation. So how can we actually know in advance, or even better, it's not possible to know in advance how many interpolations we're going to have in our string. So how do we actually handle this in JavaScript? And it is by using a construct that we'll discuss a little bit in the future. It is the REST operator, something like this. And what JavaScript is going to do is it's going to take the first argument, and then whatever additional argument that is passed to this function is going to be thrown into this arg1 array. So this arg1 is an array, and it's going to get all the additional elements that we passed to the tagged function. Let's save this and let's run the code, and you see that awesome is actually in a second array. So if we were to pass again the verb here, then you see that also the verb is in the second array, while the first array contains all the vanilla pieces of our interpolated string. So just as one example, maybe we can now work just with the tagged function. Let's forget a little bit the tagged templates. I just want to give you a better idea of how this whole REST operator works, and we will come back to this, but just if you are curious now, here if I were to console.log tagged, and then I'm going to say first and second, right? So now here, as you can see, the second here is going to be it is a parameter, an argument that is beyond this arg0, so it's going to be added to this array arg1, right? So if I save this and then I were to execute, then you see that we have first, second, and undefined. Now, if I were to pass another one, let's say, for example, first, second, and third, now you will see that this is also going to be added to our array here, right? So both the second and the third are being added to this arg1 array. And this is roughly how the REST operator works in JavaScript. So this just to give you a brief overview. And again, this part was more to show you how we can actually, or which kind of constructs we can come across when we are using template literals. And this is a very common one where you have a function followed immediately by a template literal. This is not a function call. We are not, it becomes a function call, but when we make this construct without the parentheses, then this leads to a function call. But as we discussed, it's going to pass the vanilla strings or the vanilla parts of that string to the arg0 as an array, and the other values, the interpolated values, to the second argument also as an array if we use this REST operator. Awesome, we are done covering the main aspects of working with strings in JavaScript, and in the next video we're gonna go to the next primitive types, which are null and undefined. If you don't wanna miss that, subscribe to the channel and you will get a notification when the video is out. If you've reached this part, thank you for staying until the end, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.